right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Trolls Road Free Methodist Church Paint Night for November 10th. This is going to be the second paint night that I'm doing with Trolls Road Church, so if you did the first paint night, thanks for coming back. So as you can see, we've got our painting here. We're going to be doing some bare tree branches and a cute little songbird in the tree branches. It's kind of like a little bit of a winter vibe. We're just going to wait a couple minutes before we actually start painting, just to see if anyone's going to be arriving a little bit late. Well, I got you here. If you are arriving late or you think you might not be able to stay for the whole paint night, it's going to be about an hour of painting. You can pause the video. While it is live right now, you will be able to pause it and continue going. It will just be a little bit hard for you to ask any questions unless you catch up with the live video. And it will be uploaded to the Trolls Road Free Methodist YouTube page, so you can always view it after in case you missed something or you want to go back, or you just want to watch now and you maybe don't have the supplies that you need, and you can go back and you can paint. So if you were keeping up with the paint night details, you'll see that our painting, I already have the background done and painted. It just made it a lot easier to paint the background. Otherwise, we would have had to wait for it to dry, and then we could have moved on to our tree branches. So if you didn't paint a background, that's all right. And if you're thinking that you want to wait and paint the background first and then do this, then you can do that. Again, it will be up on the YouTube page. And we do have a video on the Trolls Road Facebook page, a link to the video that will tell you how to paint this kind of background if you would like to do so. But you don't have to have a painted background to do the painting with us tonight. You can do it on a blank canvas if you would like. It is a winter scene, so it'll still work if your canvas is white rather than blue and gray. We're just going to wait about 2 more minutes to see if any other people are going to be arriving a little bit late. While we're waiting, we are going to be starting with these darker branches first. So if you want to grab out some brown paint and some black paint, I will be using burnt umber. It's Liquitex heavy body acrylics. And I'll just be using just regular, it's called Mars Black Liquitex heavy body acrylics. You can use whatever different types of paints that you want. Because we will probably all be using different types of paints, they're probably going to have slightly different drying times. So if you find that I'm moving a little bit too fast and your paint hasn't dried yet, just drop a comment in the comment section and I will slow down for you guys. Just know that there is a little bit of a delay between when I am doing this and when the comments will pop up on my screen. So it's about 10-second delay, so I will see your comment just a little bit delayed. And if you need clarification on something, or if you need me to slow down in some of the painting, then we will do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pour out some of the paint that I want. So I'm going to get my brown. And I actually want my brown to be a little bit darker than this because we want to have these dark tree branches in the background, and then we're going to have lighter tree branches in the foreground. So you can mix your brown to the desired darkness. And make sure that if you are adding some black paint to it, a little bit of black goes a long way, so put the black maybe in a separate part and then add the paint with your paintbrush so that you don't make it too dark, because black will go a very long way. So I'm just gonna grab one of my brushes. I'm gonna grab, depending on your canvas size, you're also going to be using different brushes. I have a variety of small and big brushes to help with the larger parts of the branches and the little parts of the branches that are teetering off. So that'll be where I use my small brushes. But I'm gonna use a brush that's roughly the size of the large limbs that I want. I'm actually going to use a little bit of a smaller one because it'll help me with any detail work and going back over it. And I'm just going to mix a little bit of black into my brown and make it just a little bit darker. So here is the plan for our branches, because we want to make sure that all of our branches are dry enough to do our songbird at the end. If you are following the way that my branches are going and you want to do them in much the same direction, I'm going to start with a big one on the top left that is going downward, and then we'll move on to this one. And then once we've done our background branches, this one will be dry enough to do our foreground. And I'll remind you when we go back into it. So I want to make sure that I don't have a big glob of paint on my paintbrush, because I want to make sure that I'm making fairly straight lines with my branches. Now, if you were looking at the instructions earlier, you'll notice that I included chalk in the materials. You don't need chalk, but if you would like, if you're looking at these branches and you're a little daunted by the task, you can take the chalk and you can actually mark out just ever so slightly where you want your branch to go. And depending on the color of your canvas, it might be a little bit hard to see. You don't have to use the chalk. Don't worry if you don't have any chalk. This is just if you're feeling a little bit scared about where the branches are going to go. Hi Sherry, so you came in a little bit late, so we're just doing a paint night. If you would like to, if you have a canvas and you have some paint brushes at your disposal and you would like to join us, then you just grab out your canvas, and we are making this picture, some branches and a songbird, and we're just gonna start on the branches. So if you wanted to join us and you have all those materials at your disposal, just let me know if you need any help catching up. But the branches are mostly going to be the same kind of technique. So I'm just going to start making my branches. Now don't worry if your branches aren't totally a straight line. You can actually make them a little bit bumpy on the edges, just because that's what a branch in real life would look like. I would recommend starting with the large limb before going off and doing the smaller branches attached to it. And that will help you keep the direction of your branch going where you want it to go. And then I'm just going to go back along and fill out my branch. Now, for those of you who saw my paint night last time, you'll know that when I paint, I like to paint the edges of my painting black. I think it just makes it pop. So the paint, I have them, they don't go over the side. I just paint it black, and I find that it makes the image pop more. But if you are someone who likes to paint all the way over the edge, make sure that when you're painting your branches, it reflects that. Otherwise, you'll find that you painted all your branches and you washed your brushes and you don't have the right colors to finish all your branches going over the edge. So I'm just going through and I'm adding some of those bumps, and I'm cleaning up some of the lines. Might be a little bit hard to see on the video, but on my canvas I've got, I can see patches where it needs to be filled in. And once I've got the main structure of my branch, I'm just going to start adding all the other elements that make it a branch and not just a stick. So it'll be hard to see my chalk on the video, but again, if you have chalk and you want to mark it out, then if that would help you, then you can mark it out like I have done. These branches that are in the background are going to be a little bit larger than the ones that are in the foreground. And to create definition in your picture, you might want to have a couple of them go off the page. To make it look like this painting is just a snapshot of the tree. You want to make sure that when you create these little separate sections of the branch, that you are connecting them to the branch like they belong there. like a branch. You want to make sure that you are transitioning in, but with not too smooth of a line, because sticks aren't going to transition like that from branches. So if you find that it's just too smooth of a line, just go over it and add a couple bumps to give it some definition. You want to create almost like a triangle. You don't want it to be a big straight line. You want it to start off a little bit bigger and get smaller as you go out. And that will help to create the definition of the branches. And we know that our songbird is going to be situated about here, just off center. So you want to make sure that you're filling in any gaps. So I'm going to have some branches kind of come out here so that I'm filling in this corner. And we know that our other branch is going to come up here, so we can make it go around and kind of create a circle or a little bubble for our songbird. If you find it hard to do the definition on the tree branches, you find that you're making them a little bit too thick. If you're using a flat-edged brush like I'm using, this is a flat-edged brush as well, it's just a little bit larger. If you take the paint on your palette and you just flatten the edge of your brush so it's nice and flat like that, then you can actually guide your brush along on the side and create the outline of the branch first, instead of painting with the brush flat. And then you know that you are creating that petered off kind of triangle or cone edge of the branch. And then you can just go back and fill it in. And again, making sure that you have some bumps and some edges in your branches that help make it look like it belongs in a tree. And try and change up the definition and the size of your branches to help create the overall look. So I've only had the small branches branching off of these smaller limbs, but now I've got a couple hanging on the outside of the limb here. And again, making sure that you're connecting it, having a bigger base connected to the trunk, petering out to a smaller part of the branch. And you want to follow the flow of the branch. So when you're adding sticks that are going straight out, make sure that you're adding a little bit of a curved line so that it's not just sticking out in a way that a stick probably wouldn't stick out on a normal branch. All right, how are we doing? How's everyone doing on their first limb? If most of us are ready, I can move on, and I'm going to start the second limb. I'll show you the reference picture again. So I'm doing much the same thing, and while we paint this next big limb in the back, this one's going to be able to dry, and that will let us move on to this foreground limb after. So I'm going to move on to this limb. And again, a reminder, if you didn't have chalk and you had someone in your household run and grab you chalk when you heard this, you can use chalk to just lightly put it over your canvas and sketch out what you want. If you want, you can also use a pencil, although a pencil is going to be a little bit harder to conceal on your canvas or erase than chalk. I can just rub my finger over the chalk and it disappears. Whereas a pencil, if you make a mistake or something else happens, then you can just, it'll be a little bit harder to erase. I'm going to start on my second limb. We're just having some technical difficulties on the comment section, so if you give me a comment in the next minute or so, I'm very sorry if I don't see it on time, but I'm just going to start on the second limb, and I'm just going to start in much the same way that I did with this. I'm going to do the whole big part of the limb first. And again, you can use the side of the brush to help you make it smaller at the top and create those lines of definition. Now, if some of you are watching this and, you know, maybe this is your first paint night, or maybe you don't paint that often. Maybe you like to paint and you want to get into painting, but you just keep thinking, you know, I don't think I'm really that good at painting. So I don't really want to get into something that I'm not good at. Or, you know, I think that my paintings look weird every time I do them. Well, I started out like that too. Just like with any type of art, it doesn't always look good when you start. And the artist is always harshest on their own works. You'll notice that something that you created that you think might look not good, your friends or your family are going to look at it and they're going to say, "What do you mean that's not good? That's excellent." So the artist is always harsher on themselves. And you'll find that when you're doing an art project, a lot of times art does not look good when you're first doing it. You know, I'm looking at this and I think, how is this going to turn into this? It doesn't have any of the definition that we put in. It doesn't have the extra branches. It's just dark brown lines on a canvas. And that's because we're not looking at the whole picture. So if you're worried about getting into painting or getting into something else that's an art or a sport because you're worried that you won't look good or the product won't look good, don't worry about that. Because I guarantee you somebody else is looking at what you made and they're saying, "Wow, I wish I could do something like that." Not realizing that they also have different talents. I'm going to start doing the branches coming off of our big limb. Remembering to join it. And make sure that you're watching, depending on the type of paint that you're using, it might spread a lot differently than mine. I can already see it's a little bit hard to see on the camera, but I can see lots of blue spots coming through that I'll need to go back over, that I haven't totally spread the paint correctly. It's funny that we're doing a little bit of a winter's day painting when the weather has been beautiful these last couple days, or I guess this last week. I've seen so many people walking around in t-shirts. And normally when I see people walking around in t-shirts around this time of year, you know, I kind of look at them like they're crazy. But now, this last week, when I've seen people walking around with their t-shirts, I think, yeah, you know what? I feel like I probably shouldn't have worn my winter coat out shopping today because it is very hot. And those people in t-shirts are loving the weather right now. And again, keeping in mind while we're doing our branches that we are creating kind of a focal point where our songbird is going to be. And we want to make sure that we're leaving enough room for our songbird to be the focal point. So just make sure that you continue to fill in those gaps. Try and make the tree branches look as natural as they can, being paint on a canvas. I'm just going to go over and I'm going to cover up any problem spots that I see. Let's have a bit of a temperature check. For those of you who are painting live with us right now on the 10th, where are we at with our branches? Is our first branch dry enough to start our second branch over top? This will be the branch that's in the foreground that our lovely little songbird will be sitting on. We want to make sure that it is dry enough to do the additional branch. Okay, it looks like we have a couple first branches are dry. My first branch is a little bit wet, but I'll be able to go around it. So what you can do for these next branches is they're going to be a little bit of a lighter brown. If, like me, you made way too much of this first dark brown, you can take a little bit, I want you to save a little bit of it because we are going to use some of this as highlights on the lighter branches a little bit later. So if you can save it, we're going to use it as a little bit of a highlight, but try and make a little bit of a lighter brown. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mix that right now. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to grab some white paint. I'm using titanium white, again the Liquitex heavy body acrylics. You might be using a different type of paint. And just like with the black, I'm going to put it in a different part of my palette so that I can control how light I make this brown. Now it's good to, like me, I'm using a brown that I used for the branches. It's good to keep that same brown because it's going to keep both of your branches in the same color palette. So it's going to make it look more uniform on your canvas. It's going to look like they belong together because you're using the same colors. Now, if you want to, you can wash your brush in the middle of this, but I'm actually just going to keep using the same brush. It doesn't matter to me about mixing the colors right now because this dark brown we're going to use as just a little bit of highlight on the other branches, so it's not going to be the end of the world if I'm getting it in there. But if you poured out maybe too much paint and you want to make sure that you save it, then don't put the brown paintbrush in your white paint because then you won't be able to put it back into the tube. And once you've got a brown that you like, you can compare it, looking at the other branches. Then you can start painting it in much the same way that we had the other branches. And these we're going to do, depending on the size of your canvas and how you did your first branches, you want to make sure that you have, this is your star branch right here. We're going to start with the one that the songbird is sitting on so that by the time you finish painting this and you moved on to these, this branch should hopefully be dry enough for you to start painting your songbird. So start with the one that your songbird is going to be on. If you're doing it like me and your songbird's going to be on this branch, then start with this branch. But if you changed up your branch locations and maybe your songbird's going to be somewhere over here, just make sure whatever branch your songbird's sitting on is the one that you do first. So I'm going to start with this one. And again, just a reminder, if you have chalk or a pencil and you want to chalk it out, I'm just using the flat edge of my paintbrush to create a line of the branch so that I can follow that and fill it in after. And again, when you're filling in your branch, make sure you go along and it's not just a thin curved line. Because if you keep it as a curved line, it's not going to look very natural. You'll notice that when I'm drawing out my lines with the edge of the paintbrush, I'm actually using a little bit of stippling. That's just putting the paintbrush down like this. And it's instead of drawing a straight line, because if I put more pressure on the paintbrush, it will make the paint, the paint that I've put down wider. Now make sure your songbird's going to be on a branch about here if you're following the same pattern as me. So the topmost branch here, make sure it is relatively horizontal. Again, it's not going to be completely horizontal because it's a branch, but make sure that it's relatively horizontal for your bird to be sitting on. Now this is a very muted painting, right? There's a lot of, except for the background, if you were able to paint the background, there's a lot of grays and there's a lot of browns. So if you would like, you can change up the color of your songbird. Maybe you could make it a bright red cardinal or a blue jay. Our songbird has a little bit of red, so it does give a little bit of color to the painting. But again, it is your painting, so you get to make it how you want. You can take the techniques that I'm teaching you in this video and you can use them in another painting, or you can use them in the same painting. You could try your hand at making the painting on a bigger canvas or a smaller canvas. When I painted this background, I had a lot of extra paint that I had mixed up, so I actually used it on this little canvas, and I might do this same painting but in miniature. Now that I've got this branch, I'm going to be moving on to another branch. If you're following this one, you can either do, I had one coming out of the corner and I had one coming out of the side here. It's how you want to fill up your space. You will notice that I did this branch a lot more in the middle than this branch. So I will slightly change up how the branches come out to compensate for the lost space. So for example, instead of coming straight out of the corner, because I have a branch coming out of the corner, I'm just going to move this branch's placement just slightly off center so that it's not going right into the branch. And again, remember, if you are one of those people who likes to drag their painting out to the sides of their canvases, make sure that you are also pulling your branches out to the sides, because you won't be able to, if you've mixed the colors like I have, you won't be able to fix it without a lot of trial and error of trying to get the same color back. And if you are late to the stream, what I'm talking about is when I do my paintings, I like to paint the edges black. I find that it just makes the image pop a little bit more. But with something like branches, a painting like this, it might actually make the picture pop more to have the branches over the sides, because it'll look like you're inside the tree with the songbird. And again, I'm using the same paintbrush for all of my branches, even the smaller portions, but you don't have to keep using the same paintbrush. I have some smaller paintbrushes here that I thought I would use to do some detail work. It depends on, I guess, how long you've been painting and how comfortable you are with creating these small ones. And I have said that if you make it flat when you get the excess paint off, then it is a very flat, smooth line to transition from. Keeping in mind as I travel this branch this way, we are still again trying to create that focal point for our songbird. And just like with my big branches, make sure there's no spots on your other branches that are peeking through. Depending on the type of paint you're using, might have different coverage. You want to make sure that you're putting some branches of these branches that are sitting in the foreground. You want to make sure that you are extending them over the background branches, because that's going to help create a sense that, you know, we're not looking at a flat image. We're looking into the image where the songbird is. For those of us who are painting live on November 10th, let me know in the comments section how we doing. I'm just about done with these foreground branches, and I am ready to move on to some detail work when you are. We're going to give a little bit of time for the branches to dry because we don't want the paint to mix with our songbird. Although if you are using the same kinds of browns that we are with our songbird, then it won't worry if it mixes a little bit. Okay, I don't see any comments to the contrary, so I'm going to just explain how we're going to do a little bit of detail work on the branches. You'll see from this image that I've got some lighter brown or some lighter white, and I've got it all on kind of one side of the branch, and that's kind of to show the light that would be coming in from the sun or whatever light source is coming in. So what you can do is you can actually use, because you're using the same color palette, you can actually use the same brown that you used for the foreground branches, and you can use it on the background branches. Now you can also still use the same paintbrush. I've been using the same paintbrush this entire time. But here's where it's important. Because you don't want it to be a solid color, you want to get a little bit of paint on your paintbrush and then actually go to somewhere else on your palette and try and get as much of that color off as you can so that it doesn't show up as a solid color on the branch. And what I would recommend is actually taking your paintbrush, and instead of how you would paint like this, you should turn it to the side and kind of scrape it along the side of the tree branch. This is where you might need to get a little bit of a smaller brush, because if I'm doing this, it actually helps to have the scraping part closer to the metal part of the paintbrush. But we'll see how this goes. Yeah, I'm going to switch to a smaller paintbrush because that fits what my branches are. So I'm just going to get some paint on it, wipe it off somewhere on my palette, and then use the side of the paintbrush to just bring it down the branch. And depending how much paint you have on it still, you might be able to do the whole branch, or you might have to go in and get a little bit more. Just remember that you are scraping it off every time that you do it. And I'm going to go ahead, it might be a little bit hard to see this definition that I've done on the camera, but it's just very, very faint. And if you find that it's not showing up very well, you can add just a little bit of white to the light brown, and it will help with that definition. You can also find if the scraping technique isn't working, if it's sufficiently, there's not that much paint on it, you can again do that stippling to help you get much the same desired effect. And with the foreground branches, we're actually going to add a little bit, if you still have some of this dark brown, this is optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, if you don't have the dark brown, but try and get a flat-edged brush, and you're just going to line the tops ever so slightly. And you don't have to do the line all the way across. I'm going to add a little bit, some breaks in, and just make it look a little bit more organic. This is just to help the foreground branches pop out and tell you that, you know, they are foreground branches. They are at the front of this picture, and this darker line will just help pull them out. All right, how we feel in comment section. Is your branch dry enough to start your songbird? I'm actually going to go with a little bit of a smaller brush just for our songbird to help with the detail work. And a lot of the techniques, the stippling that I talked about earlier, the stippling will really help you with the songbird here, especially because you're going to be mixing a lot of the colors. Again, I haven't washed my brush at all. Well, I've changed brushes, so now this is a clean brush. But when I first painted this songbird, I really only washed my paintbrush when I kind of did the red and white. And even then, if you don't have any water beside you, you can just wipe it on some paper towel so that there isn't extra brown on it. What I'm going to do with the songbird is I'm going to again take this brown and I'm going to take a little bit more of it if you have some extra. If not, you're making a light brown. And you'll want the light brown to be slightly different than your foreground branches. And actually, because of the songbird that I'm making, I'm actually going to add just the tiniest bit of red into this brown, just to give it a little bit more of a red hue than this golden hue that I have. So the red that I'm going to be using, it's a darker red. It's a quinqueridone magenta. It's a dark red, almost like a burgundy, and that's what I used for the bird. Again, it's the Heavy Body Liquitex acrylics. And again, just like the black and the white, I don't want to add too much red into my brown. So I'm just going to put it in a separate part of my palette and mix it in little by little until I have a color that I'm happy with. Now, I still want this to be brown, so I'm really only going to try the tiniest little drop of red. Maybe a little more. And once you have a color that you're happy with, this is where, again, the chalk might come into play. And again, if you don't have chalk or a pencil at your disposal, don't worry. The songbird, if you want to look at the example again, I would start with just a rough outline, again, doing that stippling with the side of your brush. Hopefully you have another flat-edged brush. And just do a nice round part here, and then you can get the head going and the tail. So it's really just looking at the shapes of those birds, or that bird, making sure, again, if you are doing it with your paintbrush, that your paintbrush is nice and flat. And I'm going to start it just about here. Making it nice and round. And this is where you might also want to take your small brush. Your small brush might help you in that regard too. You can take your small brush and you can also use that to do the line work for your bird. And I'm going to have his tail, depending on how you did your branches, my bird's tail is just going to peek through this middle branch. And I'm going to bring it down. And have it end in a little bit of a point. So again, don't just, if you're unsure of how you want your bird to look, don't just start painting the bird. Try and do a little bit of an outline. And depending on the kind of paint that you're using, if you make a mistake, you might be able to clear that line up if you work fast enough with some paper towel and some water. But just be careful with that technique, because if you have background paint, you don't want to strip it. And I'm going to have, as you can see on the example, a little bit of the bird just peeking out under here. You're making a nice round songbird. Now this part of the songbird is going to be red, so I wouldn't recommend doing the brown all the way up. You can do it part of the way up, just to give yourself that line. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring his head over. And then I'm going to start filling him in. So that's where I'm going to bring back my big brush. And I'm doing a little bit of a crescent here because that's where I'm going to add in a couple of the other colors. And this is where not washing your brush comes into play, because we're going to add some of the other colors to mix them all in. And if you find looking at your outline of your bird that something needs to change, well, that's why it's an outline. And you can make your bird a little bit plumper. It is gearing up for winter after all. This is where I'm going to bring in some of the other colors. So I'm actually going to use a little bit of this dark brown that we had for our background trees. Just a little bit, and I'm going to blend it into our songbird's tail. Don't worry if you go over some of these branches. If you still have the original colors, you can go over them or you can fix them with some lines. And you want to make sure that you're really blending in this color. And then what I'm going to do, again, don't worry about cleaning your brush. You can get some of that excess brown off if you want. I'm going to go in with some white on the other side of his tail. And fill in the other side. And again, I'm using that stippling technique. And with this stippling technique, depending on how you do it, it might actually look like little feathers on the bird if you have some of those outlines still left. So don't worry if it's not completely blended in. And just get the bird's tail to a color that you think looks good. I'm actually going to bring a little bit of this dark brown up here as well. I'm going to create a little bit of a crescent or boat shape with it and then blend it out. And again, if you want to go back in with your small brush and do some detail work. Really, you're just taking all these colors that we have on our palette and mixing them with the bird until it looks right. Next, you'll want to graduate into more of a white, lighter chest so that you can graduate into that red. So I'm going to take a little bit of this light brown, and I'm actually going to also put some white on my paintbrush. And again, I'm just going to keep doing that mixing, keeping with this line that we've already kind of created. And you want to blend those two lines together. It's okay if your stippling on the outside is a little bit fuzzy because the bird's feathers are a little bit fuzzy. Now this is where you might want to wipe off your paintbrush either on your palette or on some paper towel. I'm just going to wipe it off. I don't have to clean it because again I'm mixing all of those colors. And I'm going to dip into some red. If you didn't put out enough red when you mixed, if you mixed any red with the brown, grab out some red. And you also want to mix this with just a little bit of white. And then you're going to continue bringing up the red and give your bird a nice, handsome red chest. You can mix that red with the white. It will turn a little bit pink depending on the shade of red that you have. But you're mixing that down into the bird as well and into that brown. And then going up to the bird's head, again, you might want to wipe off your paintbrush. You're gonna start going into a wider face. And if you find that your paint is a little bit too dry and it's not mixing anymore, just add the tiniest bit of water to your paintbrush and you'll be able to blend the colors a little bit more. And you're bringing up that brown just around the top of the bird's head as well. I forgot to do that. Going back to my my earlier topic about how art doesn't really look good until it's finished. It's hard to look at this before it's got its eyes and its beak and to think that's a bird. It doesn't really look like a bird. And with your flat-edged brush, you want to just get some white, some lighter white or brown. Make sure it's flat, and you're just going to do a line that just shows the curvature of the wing, just to have the wing stand out a little bit more. You want to make sure that the eye and the face has sufficient amount of white. Here's where you are going to need a little bit of black and a little bit of gold or yellow. So I'm using bronze yellow. It's the Heavy Body Liquitex. And I really only need a very small amount of this. If you don't have any gold, You can mix a little bit of yellow paint into your brown paint. And this is just for a little bit of detail work. Just the bird's beak. So I'm actually going to go in with my little brush. And I'm going to give him a little round beak with a little point. I'm actually going to make it just a little bit darker with the brown. And then I'm going to take this same small brush and I'm going to get my black paint and I'm going to draw his eye, which is mostly just a black line. You'll see on the example, it just goes kind of straight across and up like that. And it follows the line of the beak. So you can actually start it just about the top of the beak. You can also give the beak a little line of black to show where it splits off. And then if you feel that you need to fill your bird in a little bit more, I'm just going to go back in and then the last part of our little bird is giving him his little hair tuft. So you can grab out that red again. You can use your small brush if you would like. And you're going to start the hair tuft just at the midpoint of his beak. Follow that line just about his head. Give it a little point just off his head. And bring it down. It's kind of shaped a little bit like a lemon. And the final touches. Our bird needs to be hanging onto the branch somehow. So you're just going to do 3 little black lines. On one side. And 3 little black lines on the other. And then he's got his little bird claws hanging on the branch. And that is our painting. Now you can go back over if you would like, if you find that there's a lot of open space. Now that you've done your bird, you think, okay, well, I've got some open space here. I can either leave it like that, maybe I like it like that, or maybe you want to extend one of your branches. I could extend this background branch if I wanted, add one here. And just a last minute touch, we did our highlights on the background branches, but we didn't get to do our highlights on the foreground brushes, short of the dark lines, because I didn't want to get them in the way of our songbird. So with these foreground brushes, you can actually take a little bit of white, mix it into an even lighter brown, and you're going to do much the same process that you did for the background branches, and just pull it along. Make sure you wipe off your brush sufficiently. And there you have it. Your songbird in some tree branches. And again, if you like to, remember, you can do the sides black like I have on the original. You can do them black. I find when I do the edges, I just put the paint on my finger and I just run my finger along the edges. It's a lot easier than trying to paint a straight black edge without going over into what you've already painted. So thank you for coming out for the Trolls Road Free Methodist Church paint night. If you came in late or you're watching this on YouTube because you wanted to do it later, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming out. I'm Catherine and I was so happy to be your paint instructor tonight. Have a good night and stay safe.